When okay, there we go.
Can
We're
hear ya.
recording. Hello, everybody. My name's Cassie. I'm Mariano's tastemaker, a sommelier, wine director in Chicago, and I'm so thrilled to be a part of this month's Women's History Month, but to celebrate all the incredible women that we have in our industry. We're all far and few between, and we love to support each other and kind of learn new things. So today I'm with Jamie Benzinger from Benzinger and Imagery, and I have her two wines in front of me. I'm so excited, but I just wanted to welcome everybody just right away. If you have the wines, feel free to raise a glass and cheers us. I'm so excited, and we're heading into the last week of Women's History Month. So just a little bit more celebrating. And so cheers to that.
Cheers, everyone.
All right, Jamie, tell us a little bit about you. How did you get into wine?
Well, I actually was pretty much born right into wine, as you would say. I grew up with it. My family, the Benziger family, migrated from White Plains, New York, over to Northern California to a little town called Glen Ellen in about 1979. And the winery was started by my Uncle Mike and my grandfather, Bruno. And so it was my Uncle Mike's vision to start a winery in California. And the whole family, got on board, and they called it, my uncle calls it almost like Beverly Hillbillies in reverse, because we went from the city to the country. And, by 1981, we had our first vintage in the bottle. So it was pretty special.
That's amazing. So this is kind of like a family business, you would say?
Yeah, no, totally a family business. My Uncle Mike was, the main kind of brain behind it, but my dad was on the crush pad when he moved out, and my Uncle Chris, and then my grandfather was on the tractor, doing a lot of the farm work. And so it really was a family business that started. My mom and my aunts were pretty much doing tastings out of the tasting room that they started. They were doing accounts payable. They lived on the ranch at the time. So the ranch that we founded is an 85-acre estate in Northern California. And our first two wines were a Sauvignon Blanc and a Chardonnay. And they actually the Sauvignon Blanc actually won sweepstakes at our local harvest fair in 1981, which was absolutely like, oh my God, put us on the map. And then the Chardonnay came in second place. And I think from there, the family, just had this drive and this passion to keep in the wine business, and to keep the quality and the family just alive through that.
Amazing. So how did you end up in the family business then?
Yes. So I actually never thought that I was never aware of what my family was. So growing up, we went to the winery, me and my sisters, we'd go run on the crush pad. We'd, go play, by the ponds and visit everyone's office, and mostly only the people that had candy or would give us gum. But growing up, my sisters and I, we just never realized how what our family had created here in Northern California. And it wasn't until I started working in the winery my summers of college, where I started off just selling tram tour tickets. We have a great tour at Benziger, but I was selling tram tour tickets, and all these customers were coming up and go, "Oh my God, you're a Benziger." And I was like, "Yeah, what's the big deal? Cool." And then they were like, "We love your Aunt Kathy. We see her on the road in New York." And, just all these people just saying so many positive things. And then just being on property and working, I was like, oh my God, my family, this is amazing. Why would I not want to be part of this? And so I initially thought that I was studying marketing at the time. And I had one marketing internship at a local winery here, Gunlock Bunchu. And then I realized I did not want to sit at a desk for 8 hours a day, 5 days a week. I grew up playing competitive soccer, so I was always on the move. Really never home on the weekends, always had soccer tournaments. And so the sitting behind a desk thing just was not my thing. And in 2009, after I graduated college, I took my first internship with my family to work in the lab at Benziger. And it was only supposed to be like 3 or 4 months. I was just going to work a harvest and then go do an outside thing, or like go work outside somewhere else. But it ended up being about a year and a half of working there. And it was after that year and a half where finally my uncle gave me like this formalized letter and was like, Jamie, it's time. You need to go outside, get some outside experience in the wine industry, and see if this is something that you truly want to do. So we called this, my cousins and I called this the Flaming Hoops of Fire. It was succession planning. So we called it the Flaming Hoops of Fire. And so every time I had a job, I worked in the lab at St. Francis Winery here in Santa Rosa. And then I would come back and my uncle was like, well, did you have a full-time job? And I was like, no. And he's like, well, you got to do that. So then I worked at Bogle Vineyards here as a full-time lab tech. And every time I would come back, he'd be like, well, do you have this experience? He'd be like, no, I haven't worked overseas. Okay, well, go over to New Zealand and, work a harvest in the cellar because you don't have a cellar experience also. So I did that. And then the last time in 2015, I came back and was like, I'm ready. I'm so ready, Uncle Mike. Like, what do you think? And he was like, well, do you have vineyard experience? And like, at that point, I was like, are you kidding me? But okay. And so I went and worked at a vineyard management company that specialized in organic and biodynamic farming. And I was there for a little bit. And then I was asked to come back to the winery in June of 2015. So it was a little bit of a trek, but honestly, every experience I had, I wouldn't trade for the world. I got to meet so many amazing people, drink different wines. I'm actually like, honestly, I got to work with so many amazing winemakers, and actually the majority of them were women winemakers that I got to work with, which a lot of people, this industry is full of a lot of male winemakers, and, women are definitely, starting to, multiply women winemakers for sure. But it was kind of cool. Every place I worked at, I had a female winemaker in a top position. So it was pretty neat and empowering for me to be a part of that, and, just make me want to come back to the winery even more.
That's really incredible, especially your uncle, who is like, this is an interview. Just because your family doesn't mean that you just get a job. But like, kind of like you said at the very beginning, where they're like, okay, you are wine royalty and, everybody knows your name. But at the end of the day, when you come into these, you grew up with it, like you said. And at the end of the day, I always forget, we're farmers, you're in the vineyards, you're doing all these things. It's essentially farming. And I think that to be able to not have that idea of, oh, I work for this, glitzy winery, because I think that's the way a lot of people view the wine industry, is that it's all glitz and glamour and look at me on my wine tour. But it's not. It's cleaning out fermentation tanks, it's spending time in the vineyard, it's dealing with all of the little tiny things that makes an incredible product. So speaking of wines, this is the wine that I have in my glass currently. This is the Benzinger Sauvignon Blanc. And on the back, it says North Coast. Will you talk a little bit about the North Coast appellation? Because I'm seeing it more and more. Yeah. And I think that it's worth a little description.
No, definitely. So North Coast, so this is primarily from two different like sub-AVAs of the North Coast, and that's Sonoma County and Mendocino County primarily. And Mendocino County, we source from a vineyard that, sits on an old riverbed. So we get a very fertile soil. And so with that, we try and get, we maintain the canopy. So we don't, we keep the grapes shaded so that they don't get too much sun exposure. So they maintain their acidity and, just kind of are like these little emerald green berries. And, that's where we get a lot of our acidity from with this wine. And then Sonoma County, we have vineyards, we source from vineyards that are a little bit warmer climate. And the soils there and the warmer microclimates add a little bit more of that melon and, that grapefruit characteristic to this Sauvignon Blanc. So ideally our North Coast Sauvignon Blanc is, we want to make it, kind of in that grapefruit melon characteristic, but also maintain that, citrus as well.
Yeah, I was going to say one of my
bulldogs are here in construction now.
Mine's napping on the couch. I made sure to tire her out beforehand. One of my favorite things about Sauvignon Blanc from California, we do see this big spectrum, and I've had some Sauvignon Blancs that are super tropical, but like you said, it maintains this really bright acidity, and especially with how warm it can get in California, it can go very quickly to that, tropical, super ripe melon, grapefruit, all of those, even like ripe pineapple notes. Yeah. So how do you pick early, or how do you maintain?
We pick at about 22.5 to 23.5 Brix level. So not super ripe, but that's kind of like our sweet spot for us, where we get those flavors from the fruit that we really like. And we harvest at night. And so we still get that nice acidity, because we really want this to be a very approachable Sauv Blanc. So this, we talk about food pairings. This is going to go great with oysters, or with a spring or a summer salad that has strawberries and goat cheese, and that acidity just kind of cuts through it. But you also can have it by itself. My family calls this like the ultimate, patio pounder, because, it's just really nice and refreshing. And it's a guilty pleasure, I would say, that when we open a bottle, it doesn't last for very long.
I would absolutely drink this. Daryl asked, what's the ABV, and is it lower due to the lower Brix? I'm just going to throw out the ABV is 13.5%. So pretty classic as far as in the realm of white wines. But Jamie, would you like to comment on that?
Yeah. So, typically like 22.5 to 23.5, you'll get a sugar to alcohol conversion that's about 13.5. We avoid trying to make any type of water adds to our Sauvignon Blanc, because we just think that kind of dilutes the wine. So picking decisions are absolutely crucial. And, we're out in the vineyard as much as we can during harvest to make sure that we get that optimal, those optimal Brix in the winery.
That's great. There was one other question also from Facebook. I don't have the Chardonnays in front of me, but there was a question saying, I've enjoyed your Chards for many years, and can you explain the difference between? So
the Chardonnays?
Yeah.
Well, I know Benziger Chardonnays have kind of transformed over the years. Like it did start off as like a pretty buttery and oak driven Chardonnay. And since then the style has kind of transformed a little bit. Like we still like, that butter and that diacetyl that we get from malolactic fermentation. But we really try hard to also, maintain that acidity. And I can't say that enough with, Benziger's white wines. We love the acidity to it, because I think it's nice, bright, refreshing. And we think that's what, people are wanting to drink, especially on a hot summer day. They don't want to pop something open and it, be, I would call like a flat wine. So, we like kind of that spritz on our white wines. And, but as for the Chardonnay now, we actually have it probably only go through partial malolactic fermentation. And then we have about maybe 15 to 20 new French oak, and it's a mixture between Hungarian and American oak. American oak will add a little bit more structure to the Chardonnay, whereas the Hungarian kind of adds a little bit of that spice. So
awesome. And then another one of the questions from John was talking about organic wines, but what I also noticed on the label here is that it's certified sustainable. There's a certified sustainable grape growing program, and that you are also certified through Demeter as well. Can you talk a little bit about sustainability, organics, and biodynamics as well?
Definitely. So there's, three kind of tiers of sustainability. So there's sustainability, then there's organic, and then there's biodynamic. And so we'll think of biodynamics as the highest form of organic farming. So to kind of separate those all, like sustainability is kind of like the lower tier when you're certifying your wines. It's important, you really do want to take, you're trying to take a natural approach to farming as much as you can, not using the fungicides and herbicides in the vineyard. We try to avoid that. But it's also sustainability about being socially equitable. So it just making sense in terms of money, and then also being socially responsible. So, how much water are we using? What are we putting, how much are we putting back into the rivers or the creeks around us? And then also like just being a good neighbor. So sustainability kind of incorporates all that. So it's just, being kind of all three of those things. Organic farming is a step above, and it's a little bit more difficult. So you have organic, sorry, I'm going to get really technical. So there's like organic wines, and then there's made with organic fruit. And so that's what we do. We do made with organic fruit on some of our wines, because organic wine, it's similar philosophy in the vineyard, definitely. You can only use certain products, and you have to go through your certifier to get them all approved before you use them. And then, but with organic winemaking, organic wines, you don't use sulfur dioxide, which is a preservative. And so a lot of the times organic or like natural wines is what they say, doesn't have, and they won't have any SO2 in it. So they're a little funky, but they're meant to be drank like right away. Whereas we make it with organic grapes, we can add SO2 to the wine to preserve it longer in the bottle. And then you have biodynamic farming, which is very much more like a closed system. So our Benziger property and our Imagery property is all certified Demeter biodynamic. So we use as much as we have on the land we build insectaries in the middle of our vineyards so that we attract good bugs. And then we'll plant like cover crop and certain flowers in rows that we call bug highways. And those will attract the good bugs out into the vineyard so that they can go and take all the bad bugs away. And then just this type of farming, we compost all our cow manure. We also have sheep on the vineyard so we have a no-till vineyard, but the sheep just naturally, when they're in the vineyard, they till the vineyard themselves. So we don't have to mechanically go in there. And this type of farming really just speaks to the flavors of the land. So we think that our Demeter biodynamic wines are just pictures and time capsules of our property, of that vintage of the winemaker. So I can get a little bit more in depth, but Demeter, like biodynamics, can get a little spiritual. We have the biodynamic calendar. There's fruit days, root days,
phases of the moon, all of that.
Yeah, of the moon. And we bury we'll stuff cow horns with cow manure, and we'll bury them on the summer solstice, and then dig them back up, and that'll be our one of our biodynamic sprays for the year after we harvest the grapes, because when you take grapes off the vine, you need to give back to that vine and give the nutrients they need for the next vintage. So it's really an interesting and in-depth type of farming, and it takes a lot of dedication to maintain a biodynamic certification. You get audited every year. You have an inspector come on every year, like literally looks at, I mean, to the point where they're asking what kind of pest control traps do you use. So we purchased some cats from Pet Lifeline, and those were our little pest control for, you know, for the last couple of years.
I got to visit a biodynamic winery up in Washington a couple years ago, and I remember saying, "Can you kind of walk me through it?" But I think the best part about biodynamics, organic sustainability, is that we're talking about the land, and the idea is if you take care of the land, it will yield the best fruit. And especially with biodynamics, I think the idea is it's a very hands-off approach. Like you said about the Sauvignon Blanc, you're not adding in water. We're not adding in other things that we do see that a lot, especially in California, to be honest. We see addition of color, we see addition of all sorts of things, wood chips. And I think it's really great to just say, this is an expression of the land and we're taking care of it. And we're going to get this incredible fruit in return. And, you know, also kind of like you said, the cats for pest control and whatnot, but it's this more remedial idea of like, we're not using hardcore chemicals in the vineyard, and we're not using them in the winery. And there are other ways that you can add nutrients, like you said, cover crops. The idea behind cover crops is we're putting nutrients back into the soil, and this is our way without using actual chemicals that are, you know, fertilizers even. I have a garden in the backyard, and I'm like, I don't know how people do any of this without fertilizers. It's really hard. So yeah. I think that's something really important to recognize, that biodynamics is very difficult. It's very time consuming, and it's expensive too, because you are basically, it is a roundabout way of getting to the same way without these modern day shortcuts. And biodynamics is how people have been farming for the hundreds of years before we had temperature control and all of these chemicals and pesticides and labs and scientists. There's been people that have been doing this so much longer than us. So I applaud you on that. Let's see, there's one more question from John. He says, do you believe there are style differences between Sonoma and Napa?
I do. I mean, definitely. I mean, there are some big cabs here in Sonoma, and the big cabs come from the mountain vineyards that are just on the other side of the Mayacamas mountain range that we share with Napa. So those are definitely kind of the bigger, I'd say that's like one of the main styles. Is I think Sonoma, we like fruit forward, but I think we like softer type of wines. And I think what makes Sonoma so unique than Napa is there's so many different microclimates here that and that sit at high elevation that we're able to grow so many different grape varietals. So I know there's other grape varietals in Napa, but you know, obviously the main one is, you know, Cab and you know, the Bordeaux blends. But I think here in Sonoma, the wines here I think are a little bit softer and tamer than your Napa.
I think also the acidity too was the one thing that I've noticed is when training staff, for example, we have, and we're going to move into Cabernet soon, so I guess we'll talk Cab, but like Sonoma Cab or Alexander Valley Cab, for Sonoma, Napa, and to be able to say, okay, what are the differences? They're the same price. How do we explain what makes them special? And I think the temperature difference is one of the main things. I remember driving down, like you said, from the Mayacamas Mountains, cutting over, and you feel this cold breeze. It was a temperature difference of like a couple of degrees, and we're in the middle of summer. So yeah, I definitely noticed that as well.
Agree.
Okay, well, I guess we'll talk about, like, I'm gonna get my red wine in front of me, and this is what I have here. We have Imagery, Cabernet Sauvignon, and tell me a little bit about Imagery and the differences between Benzinger and Imagery.
Yeah, so we consider Imagery a sister winery to Benziger. So like I told you guys, you know, with the little history of Benziger, so my dad was helping on the crush pad back when I think he was in his mid-20s at the time. And Dad never had any formal schooling, but he was a hands-on type of guy. So he was on the crush pad, he was doing pump overs, he was tasting fermenters left and right every morning, every afternoon. And he was really seeing all these lesser known varietals kind of come on the crush pad and then just get lost in these blends. And so Dad started to experiment with them and put some of them as standalone. And he ended up bottling, his first bottling, I believe, was 1985. And it was a single vineyard chard at that time. But 85 was the first vintage. And then Dad kind of really started to dive into like Spanish and Italian varietals. He found a love for them. And it was around this time too that Dad met a local art professor, Bob Nugent, from Sonoma State University, that pitched the idea to Dad to put unique pieces of artwork on individual wines. And Dad fell in love with it. It was definitely a niche and kind of a risk to take, but Dad fought for about a year with his brothers to go with the idea. And kind of with these two ideas of, lesser known varietals, single varietal wines, and then the artwork on wines, hence Imagery was born in the mid 1980s. And we were only about a 15,000 case winery. We have Tannat, Terral de Go, Albarino, we have Riesling. We have 30 plus other varietals that we sell just direct to consumer in our tasting room here in Sonoma Valley. And then 2016, we launched this tier of wines with Imagery. And this was a project that Dad and I got to work together. So when I got hired back in 15, we started working on this project. And this was for Dad and I to, how do we get Imagery on the East Coast? We were only 15,000 cases. We had a 6,000 member wine club. So we weren't making enough wine to reach every state in the United States. And so with this tier of wines, the label's supposed to represent like an artist's first paint drip down a white canvas. So it really ties it in to the Imagery collection that we have back at the winery, because we do commission artists from all over the world to put a really cool piece of artwork on each of those wines that we only sell through our tasting room. But then with these wines, we stuck with the traditional varietals because that's what sells on the shelf. Like, it's really hard to sell a Tannat in Safeway, or, it would probably be hard to sell a Tannat or Terral de Go, in restaurants.
Yeah. We had a hard time selling that in the restaurants too.
Yeah, exactly. So, with this cab, we then decided to keep with the Imagery history and put a little lesser known varietal in there. And so this cab has a touch of Petite Syrah to it. So we find that Petite Syrah just really adds some nice spice to the dark fruit flavors of the cab without overpowering it or, saying, wow, this doesn't taste like a cab. This is like a huge tannenbaum from, Petite Syrah. So they just kind of enough to put in the blend to kind of to balance each other out.
I love that, especially because we see Cabernet blended with all the other like traditional grape varieties, and that we can add other things. I always say, I teach a lot of classes and we talk about why do we blend Merlot and Cabernet together? And Cabernet is so structured and Merlot has this nice mid palate. And I think that, and it gives it this kind of lush fruitiness, and that can be achieved with other grape varieties. And so that's actually really incredible. When did all of those grapes, the lesser known grapes, the Terral de Go and Albarino, when did those all get planted?
Oh God. So we have a vineyard up in the northernmost part of Sonoma County. It's Pine Mountain Cloverdale Peak, and it sits at about 2,600 feet elevation. So that's where we source most of our fruit for Imagery from. And we have 11 different varietals that we grow on this 33 acre. And that was a cab vineyard. And then in 2008, the cab was really green and wouldn't get ripe up there. I think it was just the clone that we had planted. And so we worked with some people from Davis and some other experts, just what would work well at this area. And so we grafted over that vineyard in 2008. So it's, a little over 20 years old, some of the varietals. And then let's see, the Albarino we actually get from an outside grower, and that was planted back in 2011. And we had the first vintage in 2013, 2014. And then I'm not exactly sure about, we have an Aleatico Rosé at Imagery, and I don't know, that must have been planted maybe about 10, 15 years ago. And the growers of that grape are actually going to graft more over for us because that wine sells famously at Imagery. So it really just depends.
I'm so jealous. I now have to come and visit and try all of those wines because you said they're only at the winery, right?
I feel so lucky that I, came back to Imagery, and it's like, wow, look at all these grape varietals that I get to work with. So I feel very, very fortunate to get exposed to that so early on in my winemaking career.
Do you have a personal favorite across Benzinger and Imagery?
Okay, so Benziger wine, that's my favorite. We do a 3 blocks that comes from 3 different vineyards, which is a Bordeaux blend. That's amazing. And then we also do wine that's called Joaquin's Inferno, and it's made from Zinfandel, Grenache, and Petit Syrah off the Benziger estate. And that one is just a killer wine as well. And then Imagery, I always feel like this is like saying you have picking your favorite kid, or in my case, French bulldogs. But my go-tos, for the commercial tier, I definitely love this cab. This is one of my favorites of the 4 commercial wines. And then with the winery wines, the Viognier, and the Albarino. And then for reds, our GSM, and we have a Tusca Brava as well, which is a super Tuscan blend. So I guess I'm kind of gravitating towards more kind of fun blends.
What would you pair with this Cabernet?
I think this cab would go great with like a beef stroganoff. So kind of like a beef stew of some sort. I also think this would go great with barbecue also.
Barbecue. I'm thinking this has this nice fruit to it, but whenever I think Cabernet, of course, I go straight to like steak, of course. Mm-hmm. And that's just the classic pairing. But for me, I always like to go the game route. So lamb, pork chops, even like a heartier duck dish too. Like this wine isn't a Tannenbaum, which is normally, demands a ribeye or something with equal fat. And I think that it has this nice fruit and the mid palate that you can also drink this by itself. And that's actually very rare for a Cabernet. It usually demands food. And I think that you could have it with even something a little bit lighter, like a duck dish or like a heartier chicken dish. And lots of vegetables. But I actually like the beef stroganoff call because I haven't had that since I was a little girl, and now I want to eat that.
I know my mom makes a killer beef stroganoff, so it like always comes to my head. But also, I've had some chefs make like a cab like reduction sauce from this, and then put it over like like a molten like lava cake of some sort, and just like really nice, like good dessert. This also pairs great with.
It adds that kind of fruit quality. I think a lot of times people forget, you can put red wine in a sauce for a savory sauce, but you can also mirror any sort of fruit that would be in any sweet dish too. Like when you said chocolate, one of my like to die for chocolate desserts is a molten lava cake, but the best ones usually have some sort of a really tart raspberry or blackberry sauce that gives this bright acidity. And I think, any sort of dish, sweet or savory, demands that. And I think that's what I actually really appreciate about these wines, especially coming from California. We talk about global warming, we talk about warmer climates in general. but that these wines have this balanced acidity to go along with it.
Yeah, I agree.
All right, so it is Women's Month, Women's History Month. So I have to just kind of shout you out a little bit, and then I'm going to kind of grill you a little bit. But Jamie was 2019 Best Women Winemaker, and also named one of the 40 under 40 wine enthusiasts, which is a huge deal as far as 40 under 40 tastemakers. So we're both tastemakers, except you're in wine enthusiasts. So I just wanted to kind of shout you out a little bit because that's such a feat. And but I think, you know, we all have our routes of how, especially being women in wine, how we got into the industry. You're lucky you were born into it, but have you had any challenges being a woman in wine?
Yeah, I mean, definitely. I honestly kind of thought it was like harder for me in a way to get where I am, because I just like, I felt like I always had to do that extra step to get where I am. And then also I had to prove myself. And not just because of being a woman, but also because of my last name. So for me, it was always important that I work that much harder than everyone else. And that was tough. So like my work-life balance was like not always the best, and was definitely a struggle. I'm getting better at it now. But that's definitely been an obstacle, I think, for me. And you know, just as a woman, you know, just to get that that respect has always a little tough. So, you know,
We always feel like we have to prove ourselves, and just like you said, having the last name, but also to hear all of the hoops that your uncle made you jump through. It was like, okay, you will never be saying, you know, you were not given this job. You've had to work for it, probably harder than somebody that wasn't in the family would for a job as well.
and yeah, exactly. And I think too is like a women in wine. It's so important, and it can be tough for us women to just be confident. Like and when you make a decision, own that decision. So like not to always second guess. And that's something, you know, honestly, that my dad's kind of told me. He's like, if you're going to make a decision, just make it, and don't always go backwards. Keep moving forwards. You know, things, some of the best mistakes end up being, you know, the best thing that ever happened.
And you have the experience to back it up. So what are any of us doing in making decisions? You have to just go with it. And I think a lot of times I've recognized this as a woman who kind of, you know, had to figure out her job on the spot is, you know, ask for advice. Incredible that you've been able to work with other incredible female winemakers, but, you know, our peers are most, you know, wonderful people to lean on. And I can't tell you how many other great women, especially in Chicago, that I've been able to call up like, hey, kind of need your advice, or even, can you proofread this email? Because I feel like the tone's weird. And I feel like as a woman, we're always trying to take these extra steps to make sure that we're doing the right thing, just because there's always going to be somebody that's going to question you. And especially making wine, every little tiny decision, all the way to a final product, can make or break your brand.
Yeah. And just, you know, another thing that I've kind of noticed is, you know, women, you know, because my boss, I've talked to her. She's a woman, Lisa Amaroli, and she's, you know, kind of told me how it was back in the day, like in the 90s, when she was like really coming to start in her winemaking career. And she worked under a lot of men, and it was just really competitive amongst women. Whereas I think nowadays women are coming together to be more collaborative with each other. And that type of teamwork and camaraderie, I think just helped us, you know, become more empowered within the industry. So it's pretty neat.
That's amazing. I did shout out all your accolades, but is there one of your own personal proudest moments that you want to share?
I'm not gonna lie, like, I mean, those accolades, like I when I got them, I was like, oh, I feel too young to be getting it. Like I wish it would have
Should
been.
never feel that way.
I know. And I had a lot of people, like, it was just like kind of hard for me because, I'd only been back at the winery for, a few years. And, but I am super proud of those moments. But honestly, probably one of my proudest moments was bottling my first wine that I did by myself. Because when my dad retired in 17, we were collaborating on stuff. And so my first wine that I just made single-handedly by myself in 18, my dad, took a sip and was like, this might be the best, vintage of, I think it was our Albarino. He's like, this might be the best Albarino yet. And I just was like, oh, okay. Like I got I've always had dad's approval, but to have just a wine that only I touched pretty much. Obviously we have an amazing cellar team, but that I, made all the decisions on my own. And then dad kind of, put a stamp of approval on was, I was like, okay, I can do this.
These are people who have been making wines, they're wine veterans. So to get that seal of approval, yes, it's from your dad, but somebody who built this brand from the beginning up, and to be able to say, you are doing something right. That is really incredible.
And they were big shoes to fill, because I remember when dad retired, I was like, don't do it. Like, you're still so young. Like, what are you going to do? He's like, I'm going to go play golf. And I was like, you play golf every day practically. Like, come on, dad, just stay a couple more years. And he's like, no, Jamie, I'm passing the torch. And I was, really scared. Like, I just, it was definitely, I was like, oh my God, am I going to be able to do this? And he's like, Jamie, you got this. Don't worry. And I was like, okay. And so, yeah, after that moment, and, it's crazy because every year seems to go by faster and faster. It just, time flies, I guess, when you're having fun and you're working hard.
That's incredible. Yeah. To be able to make these incredible wines and do fun side projects. And, it is one of those where you said something about age, is you grew up with it. So to say, oh, I'm this young woman, I think you're downplaying it, because I think we always do that as women in the industry, and especially as younger women in the industry. I kind of dealt with that as a wine director. I became wine director. My first position was when I was 23, and people are like, you haven't even been able to drink this long. And I grew up with wine, so it was kind of the same thing. It was, this has been in my family, and although I haven't been legally allowed to drink, it's been around the appreciation of food and wine. And to be able to, I guarantee, Jamie, were you working in the winery as a kid? We're not trying to talk about child labor laws, but like, you help out, right?
No, I would go on Sundays with dad during harvest, and we would do pump overs, and
you're learning, it's by osmosis. You're just around it, and so when you say your age, I always just kind of brush that off, because it has nothing to do with that. It has to do with the experience. You've been around it for so long, but you've also jumped through all these hoops. You've worked with all these incredible other winemakers in other countries, and you take a little bit of something from every place you go, and you have all of these accolades to show. And these wines are incredible. And I think the first thing that jumped out at me is the value as well. The Sauv Blanc is $10.99 at Mariano's, Imagery $15 basically. So these are wines where I would drink, like you said, I would just grab a case of it and have it in my home, because they are so easy to drink. You don't necessarily have to plan a nice steak dinner or a pairing. Like you said, we're starting to get these beautiful days in Chicago where it's like, I kind of want to drink wine outside on the patio, and I would definitely drink this.
No, for sure. Yeah.
Are there any other questions from anybody in the Zoom or anybody on Facebook? I'm more than happy to field any of those, but Jamie, if you'd like to talk about anything else, this has been so fun, because I think there's always this idea of how do we talk about these things, but also like being women, and kind of the conversation naturally just develops has been wonderful.
Well, I do want to say one thing is, I know things are starting to open up, and as they do, if you want to book a trip, or wine country is going to be beautiful this spring, this summer, and well into harvest season in the fall. So please don't hesitate to reach out if you want, and we would be happy to get you on a tour. My little sister gives amazing tours of the Benziger estate. We have an amazing art gallery at Imagery. So just two beautiful places within wine country that we would love to host you. So if any of you guys do come out, please think of Benziger and Imagery for a visit.
I'm going to take you up on that, actually. My dad lives in the Bay, so he just got his second vaccination. And so I'm maybe going to try and bounce out there for a couple of days.
Please do.
All right. Well, as we wrap this all up, I just wanted to say thank you, everyone, for tuning in. Women's History Month has been so much fun. We have lots of incredible other events going on until the end of the month. So keep a lookout on Facebook for those, and Instagram as well. But Jamie, I'd like to just say thank you as well for taking the time. These wines are phenomenal, and I cannot wait to actually meet you in person and hopefully in wine country. So I'll cheers you to that.
Thank you so much. Thanks,
Thank
Amanda.
you.
Thanks everyone for joining. Cheers.